welcome to your deep dive. Looks like we're taking a trip into Great Expectations this time. This one's a classic, sent in by you, of course. And we're going to do more than just skim the surface. We'll dig into those fascinating details and see why it still matters today.
You really picked a good one. Dickens had a way of writing about things that are still so relevant. Ambition, social class, love, guilt, you name it.
It all starts with that opening scene, doesn't it? Pip in the graveyard, running into that terrifying escaped convict. I mean, talk about setting the scene.
Yeah, the graveyard, the fog, that gibbet off in the distance. You can feel the mood right away. But Dickens is doing more than just that. He's hinting at what's to come for Pip and how complicated things will get with this convict.
And Pip's reaction, too. Stealing food, even though he's scared. It's like he wants the convict to like him, even though he shouldn't.
It's interesting how food plays into so much of the story. You know, for Pip, coming from poverty, food means scarcity. It's almost like he carries that shame with him, even when he gets rich later on.
You can tell, right? The way he describes hiding that bread and butter, like it's something huge. It's a lot for a kid to handle.
Dickens was really good at using those little details to show you what's going on inside a character's head. Keep an eye out for that as we go. And speaking of inner turmoil, let's talk about Pip's childhood.
Yeah, a far cry from the fancy life he gets later, living with his sister, Mrs. Joe, and her husband, Joe, who's a good guy, but simple. It's not an easy life for Pip.
It's rough. Dickens doesn't shy away from showing how much Pip suffers, physically and emotionally. It's not just being poor, it's the power dynamics in families, how they can trap you, just like society can.
It makes you wonder if Pip wants a better life, partly just to get away from all that.
And that leads him right to Miss Havisham and Sada's house, which is a whole other world. That first visit, the clocks all stop, that decaying wedding feast, Miss Havisham in that faded wedding dress. It's a powerful image.
It's almost like a nightmare dressed up as a fairy tale.
Yeah, and it's all intentional. The stopped clocks. That's Miss Havisham's life, frozen in time. The rotting feast, her bitterness, like she's refusing to move on from her heartbreak.
Makes you think, maybe holding on to past pain can trap you even more than any physical place could.
It's a big idea. And then you've got Estella, raised in this weird environment. She's beautiful, but she's been taught to be cold. Dickens uses them to explore what love really is.
Even though she's cold, young Pip is totally drawn to her. It's almost like he wants her approval, even if she can't actually give it.
Makes you wonder what Pip really wants from her, right? Is it actually love, or is it something else? Something to do with wanting to be better than who he is now?
It's complicated, for sure, and it sets up a lot of what happens to him. Speaking of which, his life changes big time when he gets that fortune and goes to London to be a gentleman.
Now think about that. Suddenly he's got a higher social status. Dickens uses that to show us how people move between classes, but also if it really makes them happy.
And Pip gets caught up in it. He doesn't quite fit in. His values change. He even drifts away from Joe, who was always there for him.
Like, he's trying to be someone he's not, forgetting who he is, forgetting Joe's kindness and loyalty. You have to ask, is Pip becoming who he really wants to be, or is he just living up to someone else's idea of him?
And all this time, we're wondering who's giving him all this money. Pip thinks it's Miss Havisham, which just makes things even more messy. But then, just when you think you know, Dickens throws us a curveball.
That reveal that his benefactor is Magwitch, the convict from the beginning, it turns everything upside down. Makes you think about your own ideas about who deserves kindness, where good things can come from.
It's powerful stuff, and it gets to one of the main points of the book, how things aren't always what they seem.
Imagine Pip, right? Finding out it's this guy, someone he's always been afraid of. The disgust, the guilt of taking his help, all his grand ideas come crashing down.
It's not just what's going on in Pip's head either. Dickens makes us think about our own prejudices. Can we see past social labels? Can we see the good in everyone, even people society says are bad?
It reminds us that good things can come from unexpected places, and judging people based on their past or their status can really blind you.
It's amazing how Dickens weaves all these ideas into such a great story. And this is just the start for Pip. We've only just begun to see how he changes and how these discoveries will affect him.
So stick with us. There's so much more to explore as we go deeper into Great Expectations. Back again for more of Great Expectations. Before we jump back into Pip, remember how Dickens uses descriptions and imagery?
Oh yeah, he could really make you feel things just through his writing. Like that opening scene out in the marshes, the gibbet, the fog. It was almost creepy.
He was great with that. Not just describing things, but making you experience them. You're right there with Pip, feeling all that fear and uncertainty.
And the food stuff, too. It's not just about eating. It's tied into bigger ideas like guilt, social class, even love, in a way.
Right, like Pip stealing that food for the convict. It's almost desperate. He wants to be liked, but there's that shame mixed in too. And that same shame hangs around him even when he's in those fancy London circles.
It's like he can never really shake that feeling that he's not good enough, even with money and status.
And that inner struggle shows up in his relationships too. Think about Biddy. She's a link to where he came from, a groundedness that Pip seems to lose.
Their relationship is interesting. Biddy's straight with him, cares about him truly, but he doesn't always listen to her.
Sad, isn't it? He's so caught up in these big expectations that he pushes away someone good. It shows that sometimes chasing after what you think you want makes you miss what you already have.
Like your biggest dreams can lead to your biggest letdowns.
Exactly. Dickens is playing with that idea throughout the book. Remember that awful dinner at Mr. Pumblechook's? So awkward. But it perfectly shows how out of place Pip feels.
Oh, poor Pip. Stuck there feeling like everyone's judging him. And Pumblechook constantly going on about how Pip used to be nobody. Just makes it worse.
Pumblechook? He's something else. He's all about social status, not real connection. He loves taking credit for Pip's success, but also loves reminding him where he came from.
Like he represents all those pressures Pip's trying to escape.
And even with all that social climbing and inner turmoil, Dickens can still make you laugh. Remember Mr. Wopsle trying to be Hamlet?
Yeah.
So funny. But it also says something about us, wanting to be noticed, even if we make fools of ourselves trying.
It's those little things, those funny characters that make Dickens' work so great, even now.
Exactly. It's more than a story. It's like a whole collection of human experiences, all tied together. And while we're focusing on Pip, we can't forget the women in his life. Miss Havisham, Estella. Their whole deal is fascinating, deserves its own look.
Totally. Lots to unpack there, especially how it reflects on women back then, what society expected of them.
Yeah, how those expectations shape everything, not just individual lives, but relationships too.
Yeah.
Mothers and daughters, mentors, it's all connected. We'll untangle it when we come back.
We're back, and I'm ready to get into one of the most interesting parts of Great Expectations. Miss Havisham and Estella. It's a messed up kind of love, don't you think?
Absolutely. Miss Havisham, she's stuck in that heartbreak, left at the altar. And she raises Estella to be just like her, unable to love. It's like Estella's a weapon, meant to hurt men because Miss Havisham was hurt.
It's a strange way to be a mother. Miss Havisham wants Estella to be bitter, just like her.
And Estella's stuck in the middle. She's beautiful, she's smart, but she can't connect with anyone. Makes you wonder how that affects her later in life.
Like she's in this fancy prison that Miss Havisham built. Speaking of prisons, Satis House itself feels like a character. All that decay. It shows how bad it is to cling to the past.
Satis House is like looking into Miss Havisham's mind. The clock stopped, the food rotting. It's because she won't let go. She's trapped herself, haunted by what could been.
And Pip gets pulled into all this. He's a victim, but he's also drawn to it. He hates Estella and loves her at the same time, just like we're drawn into this world as readers.
Dickens was so good at making characters that are flawed, but still interesting. We judge Miss Havisham, we feel sorry for Estella. But we also see their pain.
We have to remember, they're products of their time. Women back then had so few choices, and we see how that affects these characters.
That's a good point. And then we find out who Estella's parents really are. That she's Magwitch's daughter, the convict. It blows Pip's mind. All his ideas about class, about being a gentleman, gone.
It's a great twist. It shows how hypocritical society was back then, what's respectable and what's not. Those lines get blurry. Makes you question everything.
And it brings us back to that main idea. Looks can be deceiving. Real worth can come from anywhere.
It's something Pip has to learn as he goes through all this. He has to figure out what he really wants and give up on that fake gentleman life.
So what are great expectations, really? External success, money, status, or is it something more?
I think Dickens wants us to see that real happiness comes from accepting yourself, connecting with others, and living a good life. Seeing the good in everyone, even though society looks down on. Finding happiness in simple things.
Right. The ending's open to interpretation, but it feels like Pip has learned his lesson. He's let go of those illusions, found a better way to be.
Like he's gone through some tough times, literally and figuratively, and come out changed. No more shallow desires, just a real life.
And those tough times matter. Think about the fire and Joe's forge, all that warmth and honest work. And then the fire that hurts Miss Havisham, it destroys, but maybe it cleanses too.
And don't forget Orlick almost killing Pip with fire. It's scary, but it shows us who Pip really is deep down.
Those moments are so important. They force Pip to see his own faults, but also his own strength.
And that's where we see how much he can grow.
So, as we finish up our deep dive into great expectations, let's ask ourselves, what are our great expectations? What are we chasing after? Do those things match up with what we truly value? Something to think about. And I hope looking at Dickens's book with us has given you some new ideas about this classic story. Maybe even spark some good conversations along the way.
Thanks for joining us. Keep exploring.